Welcome to another unit in chemistry. This one is going to look at chemistry in a little bit different of a way. Our last unit in chemistry, matter and chemical change, was all about combining atoms and elements together to form cool new things. This one is about why those cool new things, those compounds, are important, how we use them, why we need them, and not just us, also plants. So this unit is on environmental chemistry. Some of those compounds are also bad for us. So we're going to look at those two different things, like what do we need to keep us healthy and what do we need to keep away from us. So it's going to be about pollution and nutrients and all this wonderful stuff, and it's going to be a heck of a ride. All right, let's dive in. Every field of science, the main ones like biophysics, chemistry, they're broken into smaller branches. Just like physics, there's particle physics, there's Newtonian physics, there's theoretical physics, astronomy, like that kind of stuff for physics. Chemistry has two main branches, organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. And then there's further branching out from there. But those are the two main ones in chemistry. When you go on to take university chemistry, if that so pleases you, you'll notice that you'll either be taking organic chemistry courses or inorganic chemistry courses. And then you follow your pathway from there. The distinction between organic and inorganic sucks. It is totally arbitrary. It's totally random. The original idea was that organic chemistry, this was the original definition, organic chemistry was anything required or created from a living organism. Now we've realized that that doesn't fit because other things that like certain chemical compounds that we used to classify as organic, as something that came from something living, we found out can actually be made from non-living things, from non-living processes, just nature doing nature stuff. Suddenly you have these molecules that we thought only came from living organisms. So we still use that separation though in chemistry. We still call it organic and inorganic chemistry. However, that isn't really all that suitable now. So quick side note to chemistry. Chemistry, get your crap in order. Your branches of science don't even make sense. So what organic and inorganic chemistry today has taken on, the meaning that we have, is that organic chemistry is working with anything that involves carbon and mostly hydrogen. So if you're looking at a chemical compound that has carbon in it, it is most likely an organic compound. Not entirely though. Like for example, carbon dioxide, that's something that's produced naturally and also produced from living organisms. Carbon dioxide is something that contains carbon, obviously, but it actually isn't classified as organic. It's inorganic. Almost everything else though, almost everything else that has carbon in it is most likely going to be classified as organic, as like we're called carbon-based life forms. All of Earth's life forms are called carbon-based because that's the main atom, the main element that makes up our life. We really need that particular element. So anyway, organic compounds are anything, almost anything that contains carbon, and most of them also contain a bond with hydrogen in some form or fashion. So since our unit on environmental chemistry is going to be talking about what living things need and what living things definitely don't want to have, we're going to mostly be talking about organic chemistry when we're talking about the things that we need, and then we're going to be talking about inorganic chemistry when we're talking about the pollution and the other things that we definitely don't want. We want organic things inside of ourselves, mostly, and we want to keep the inorganic stuff mostly out. So organisms need stuff. There's some stuff that we need a whole bunch of, and those are called macronutrients. Macro meaning large. Nutrients are things that are needed. And then there's also micronutrients. Those are the things that we don't need very much of. Now, we need to separate our conversation a little bit here into two groups. One is what animals need, and one is what plants need. The stuff that animals need is different than what plants need, mostly because most of the stuff that we get is from plants. Ultimately, even if we eat meat, that meat came from an animal that ate plants. So the macronutrients that animals need, which includes us, are there's three big groups of them, and then there's a couple other ones as well. So the three that really is going to be the focus of our conversation are our energy sources. So we have carbohydrates, which are things like your bread, your wheat, rice, like anything with sugar. That's called a carbohydrate. Then we also need fats. Fats are kind of like bound up, like condensed sugars. And then finally the third one is protein. So those are the three things that we need in huge quantities. We need a lot of carbohydrates, we need a lot of fat, and we need a lot of protein. There's two others that we also need that if we were going to be stricter on the definition of things that we need lots of, we also need lots of water, and we also need lots of fiber. Those are the 5 things that we take in mass quantities. Again, the 3 big ones being our energy sources, protein, carbohydrates, and fats, or another word for fat is lipids. So there's also a whole bunch of other things that we need, but in much smaller quantities. For example, our vitamins and minerals. Those things we definitely need. Like we all know the story of scurvy. Like if you don't eat any vitamin C, you develop something that's pretty degenerative, that really messes up your body. But we don't need much of it. We really don't need much vitamin C. Like those vitamin packages that people get, like those multivitamins, for the most part, are completely overloading your body with something that you really don't need. Like if you look at the daily requirement for humans, like Google it, look it up. I challenge you to look up how much of any vitamin that you need, and you'll see that it's in either micrograms or milligrams. Even a milligram is 1/1000th of a gram, and a gram is a tiny amount. Like a gram of sugar is just a couple of little cubes of sugar, like really not that much. And then talking about a milligram and then a microgram is a millionth of 1 gram. Now some of these vitamins we need in that ridiculously small quantity. And yet we still, like if you eat a fairly decent array of foods, like from your vegetables, your fruits, you're getting those micronutrients. So let's talk about what some of these macro and micronutrients are good for. First, let's talk about some of those macronutrients, some of those things that we need a lot of. Carbohydrates, that is your energy source. That is your key main energy source. That's where, like when you're lifting weights, when you're walking, when your heart is beating, when your brain is thinking, all of it is using sugar. And a whole variety of different sugars. We break that down to produce energy-producing molecules. So fats are stored up sugars. Like when you have too much sugar in your body, the fat is a really useful molecule because it takes a whole bunch of sugars and it condenses it into a tiny little bit of space, which is much easier for your body to store. Animals in general love having fat stores. They're useful to us. Particularly like if there's any day where you can't find food, you got those fat stores that can take care of you. If your heart needs to beat, your lungs need to inhale and exhale, your brain needs to think and send signals across your body. If you don't have those things working, you do not live, you die. So carbohydrates and fats, or lipids, are 2 really important things for your body, and you need lots of them. The third one, proteins. Those are important because those are kind of like the building blocks for a lot of the things in your body. They are the structure building molecule to build up muscles, to build up, anything. Anything working in your body requires protein. So your carbohydrates and your lipids, they're useful in that you need them to give you energy, and then your proteins are the building blocks for your body. So micronutrients, some of the things that we need a tiny little bit of. I will give you a more detailed list in your note package, but definitely there's a couple that I want to mention, namely like iron. Iron is a huge component of blood. It's something that allows oxygen to bind to your blood cells, and then that oxygen is brought around your body. For obvious reasons, you need that oxygen to break down your sugars, to extract that energy that we so desperately need to do everything. Also, like calcium. Calcium is useful in your bones, but it's also useful in your nervous system. It helps you conduct electrical signals along your nervous system. So when your brain says, hey, heart, beat, it needs to send a signal to do that. There's pumps of ions that your body uses to make that happen. Now, don't worry about that, how those pumps work, but you do need to know that things like calcium and potassium, they're used by your nervous system. You also need chlorine, surprisingly. Chlorine sounds like it's something that's like, hey, I thought it was a poison, it kills you. Yes, you use it as a component of your digestive system. The acid that's in your stomach, it's hydrochloric acid. It requires chlorine to break down. So anyway, hydrochloric acid, huge component, so you need some chlorine. So anyway, that's just a short list of some important micronutrients. There's definitely other ones, but anyway, let's start talking about plants. Now plants are different. They've got different requirements. They need different micronutrients and they need different macronutrients. So let's start with the macronutrients. The big three that plants need. You can find those on a bag of fertilizer. When we fertilize our lawn, when we fertilize a tree, whatever you're fertilizing, when farmers fertilize their land, they're really looking to add three important nutrients, and those are the macronutrients that plants need. So on any bag of fertilizer, you'll see that there's three numbers listed there. For example, it could be like 21-7-7, or it could be 13-0-1. Different fertilizers are needed for different farms or different plants. So what those numbers mean is the level of NPK. Remember it like that, NPK. No problem, kids. NPK is nitrogen, potassium, or nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The three important things that plants need. Just like we had a couple of other macronutrients that we need in fairly large amounts, but not necessarily huge amounts, plants have a couple other ones as well. They also need calcium, sulfur, and magnesium. Now, our macronutrients were for two things. Remember, it's our energy molecules, and it's also the building blocks for us, like protein, carbohydrates, and lipids. Those were important for us because that's the energy, and then also the building blocks behind our bones and muscles and nerve tissue, like all of those things that we need, our structure. So plants, their big three, the NPK, they're important for the exact same reason, about energy and structure. The energy, though, they produce their own energy. They produce it in their leaves. So what the macronutrients for plants is all about is making sure that those leaves the foliage The chlorophyll, the things required for photosynthesis, those are what they need in large amounts to make sure that they can make the energy, because they make sugar. And like, I know that when we eat plants, we get those sugars, we get those carbohydrates, but they need them too. That's why they make them. They don't make them for us, they make them for them. We just happen to take it from them. So they're macronutrients, again, it's for photosynthesis. And then the other chunk of macronutrients is to build their structure. So not only build the leaves, but they also need to build the roots. Like calcium, it's important for the roots, and same with potassium. Those two things, important for the root structure. And then also there's the main structure, like the trunk or the stem, and then there's the leaves. So they need to make the energy and build the structure. We need to use the energy or get the energy and make the structure. Exact same setup, but different elements required, because we go about getting our energy and structure in slightly different ways, as I'm sure you can tell. So you might be thinking, why would a plant ever need us to fertilize it nitrogen? If you were quite savvy with your science, and you take a second to think about that, our atmosphere is made of 79% nitrogen. Just the air you breathe in, when you take in a breath, 79% of that is nitrogen. So why would a plant need it? Because they cannot use free nitrogen, it's called. So N2, the gas that's floating around in the air, is completely useless to both plants and humans. So we need it in compounds. So let's talk about a nitrogen cycle. All nutrients cycle. All nutrients go through different stages. They go from one form into another, into another, into another, and then eventually they get back to their original form and they loop around. They cycle. Nitrogen is no different. Nitrogen starts off as free nitrogen up in the air, but plants can't use that. They need some way of turning it into something they can use. And there are some special bacteria that take care of that for us. They're called nitrogen fixing bacteria. So when we say that they're fixing nitrogen, it means that they're taking free nitrogen from the air and they're turning it into compounds like nitrates, which are nitrogen and oxygen compounds. Plants can use those. And same with urea and ammonia. Like those are fixed nitrogens. Those are things that can be used by plants. Eventually, that nitrogen makes its way back into the nitrogen gas form, and then it cycles back through. So this is the nitrogen cycle, and there are cycles for every single different element, including carbon and sulfur and oxygen. They all cycle, but the extent that we're going to look at cycling from nutrients at this level is just the nitrogen one. So plants also need micronutrients, just like us. There are certain things that they need in smaller quantities, things like selenium, iron. Again, I'll give you a bigger list in your note package so you can have a look at some of the more specific things. But there's a couple in there that are accessory things to help out, just like we have some that help us conduct electricity or make hydrochloric acid in our stomach, like little things around our body. Plants also need to have little things like helping move the food around their body, move the food around the plant, move the water around the plant. They need certain vitamins and minerals to do that. So the last thing that needs to be said is more simply a definition. It's called a substrate. A substrate is a place in which an organism lives where it gets all of the things that it needs. So, namely, the simplest substrate to think about is like soil. That's where a lot of the plants on the planet get their nutrients from. Plants can, so the soil is called a substrate. The place where plants get most of its minerals, gets its water, all the things that the plant needs. Humans don't really have a substrate. It's not a specific place where we live and get all of our stuff. Bacteria certainly have substrates, and same with fungus. Anything that requires sitting on a nutrient-rich place to get certain nutrients. Lichen are kind of cool in that their substrate is actually rocks. Well, some lichen. Some lichen actually require sitting on top of rocks to get certain nutrients from those rocks. So it's not always soil, but for the most part, the most important substrate is soil on our planet. Let's wrap up. So we talked about this new unit of chemistry in which we're starting environmental chemistry. We're going to be spending this unit talking about the things we need and the things we don't need, and more specifically, how we keep those things we don't need away from us. How do we mitigate pollution? So the things that we need, there's things we need lots of, things we need little of. There's micro and macronutrients. Macronutrients are things we need lots of. For animals, that's things like our carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. For plants, they need the NPK classically from fertilizer. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then there's a whole bunch of other little things that both plants and animals need to do little jobs around their body. Nutrients can cycle. For example, nitrogen has a nitrogen cycle in which it comes from free nitrogen in the air. It's fixed by bacteria and it enters into the organisms, then it's used by the organisms and sent back up into the atmosphere, and thereby it cycles. Plants get their nutrients from substrates, and that is our first lesson. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.